In this, our first and very special episode of 2025, the Hadean podcast goes on an adventure of academia to the Spanish city of Cuenca with Erzebet and José Leitão, who, over food and drinks, describe recent discoveries in the understudied field of Portuguese learned magic. José describes to us the beautiful melancholia of his time doing archival research, the lows and highs of the discovery of long-forgotten manuscripts, and the story of how he came to make some exceptional findings. They also touch on a broad array of subjects, from historical analysis to the difficulties in which we categorise types of magical expression through the centuries. You are absolutely in for a treat with this episode. I am your host, Matt Hadfield, and I welcome you to the Hadean Press podcast. But today, I pass the reins over to Erzebet as she interviews the wonderful José Leitão. Enjoy.
Hello, dear listeners. We are coming at you from Cuenca, Spain, where I am here with José, who is on a research trip, while I am researching some things of my own. This is a very informal meeting among friends. We are going to talk about the search for magical manuscripts in the Inquisition archives, what it's like to finish a thesis. I'll have you know he is now Dr. José to you. And we are very proud of him for achieving such a monumental task. I am about on page 600 of the thesis. It is incredible. José, why are you in Cuenca?
Well, first of all, for general information, I was already a doctor for 10 years.
That doesn't count.
Thank you for noticing that.
That doesn't count. Physics.
Sorry, the question was what?
Why are you in Cuenca?
Mix of opportunity, first of all, and doing a follow-up on a small section I wrote for my thesis that I hope in the future to make a book out of. There was during my research, I was looking into particular expressions of early modern Spanish astral magic. And while looking for references to a particular type of magic book, which I had never heard before, mentioned briefly, not briefly, but in very undetermined terms, very, blacking out. We should mention that we're drinking. Anyway, there was a few mild references to a book in a Lisbon Inquisition trial out of a bit of luck and one of those weird academic rabbit holes sometimes you fall into. I managed to ascertain that in the Inquisition of Cuenca, which I didn't even know was a thing until very recently, much less the city of Cuenca, that in a trial from the Inquisition of Cuenca, the same exact title I was looking for was being mentioned in a trial, and all indications pointed towards not only was that same book mentioned in a trial over here, the book itself was here, or a version of it. So I came here like 2 years ago while writing the thesis. I took my notes, asked for digitalizations of the book, which indeed does exist. We can go into it a bit later. But having finished the thesis and even obviously wanting to eventually publish that book, I have now reserved an entire week to fully read the trial of Jerónimo de Liabana, complicated individual, somewhat of a fraudster, but also somewhat of a, even if he was solely a fraudster, a very committed fraudster to the fraud of magic at least, to the point of having genuine magic books. And that's what I'm here doing.
Well, I was very privileged to see these magic books today. And it's always a shock for me to see these texts, because I always expect a massive, great tome, and they're like tiny pamphlets, aren't they?
Yeah, it's the experience of finding a magic book is particular, but after a while, after it fades away, as most things tend to fade away in depressing individuals such as myself. The melancholy is strong in me. After it fades away, you are confronted with the banality of the magic book itself, of the object. It's just it's disturbingly tangible, disturbingly normal. It's a book. It's something that somebody had. And particularly when you're talking about the Inquisition in the Iberian Peninsula, or the Iberian Peninsula in general, you didn't want a big, massive thing to show around because those were illegal objects. So magic books will take the form of small pamphlets, 30 pages, 40 pages.
Easily transported,
hidden.
Easily copied.
Very, very easily
You
copied.
encountered many instances of a sort of black market in magic books, didn't you?
Yeah. Even sometimes, even if like a fully printed magic book, a big format like a big Agrippa or something like that, if it would find its way into the Iberian Peninsula, people start copying small sections of it, never the full thing, and they would turn them into these smaller, easily transportable objects, unless they had the weight to be able to own a magic book and somehow dodge the Inquisition, which was possible. But if you had that amount of weight, you would just buy the book anyway. You wouldn't care with having these smaller ones.
You have spent a lot of time in the last however many years in the Inquisition archives. As a melancholic person, has that had an impact on you? Like reading, you must have read a lot of stories to get to the good bits that you were looking for.
Yeah, that's a long question to answer.
It is. But it's part of historical research, It's the things scholars go through that nobody knows about, because all we see is the shiny product at the end.
Yeah, and the process to get there is not shiny at all.
No.
Sure, but for reference, I started actively working on the Inquisition. I started it when I was writing the Opuscula Cipriani. That was the first time I went head first.
Was it?
Yeah, when I started doing my own transcriptions and my own translations. Right. Up until that point, I was kind of limiting myself to what scholars had transcribed, which actually, in Portugal during the 50s and the 60s, there were a few guys who almost solely published transcriptions of Inquisition trials. So you have very selected trials that are available if you have access to a library. But the Opuscula was the first time I started doing it myself. That was 10 years ago. No, I'm lying.
Not 10.
No. I started working on the Opuscula.
Cyprian was 10.
Yes, the Opuscula was 2017.
I think it was published in 2018, or I was working on it.
But I was writing it in 2017 because that's when I left the Netherlands and moved back to Portugal, and I started doing the whole archive thing. Yes, it was 2017. So it's 7 years, which is something of looking into the Inquisition.
Gosh.
There are the Portuguese Inquisition. You have some. There are two types of work that you can do. Most people tend to focus on the Lisbon Inquisition because, first of all, there's a lot of research being done on the Portuguese Inquisition, not by Portuguese, but by Brazilians. They have a lot of people publishing thesis on Judaism and even magic. And I'm going to be a bit of an asshole, of very variable quality.
Right.
You have excellent theses. You have other theses that maybe this individual should have done something else.
Dear.
Look, and my supervisor, I read a thesis. This is jumping around, but...
That's all right. It's what it's for.
I was quoting a thesis I had read about this author. I don't remember his name, and if I did, I wouldn't say it.
No.
I'm not that kind of asshole.
No.
And I was quoting it, and I sent it to my supervisor. Here's the chapter. I just said, this thesis, don't quote this thesis. I was a supervisor of this individual. I refused any involvement when I saw what he had written.
Harsh.
Yeah, so there's a great variety of quality of thesis emerging from Brazil, but the volume is very impressive. And this is because the Lisbon Inquisition is entirely digital.
Yes.
Everything has been paid for a few years ago, all restored. Everything is online. You can look at the Lisbon Inquisition anywhere in the world. You can write anything about it.
You did mention in your thesis there's some areas where access is almost impossible to some of the Inquisition documents.
Yeah, those are the Inquisitions of Coimbra and Évora, because the National Archives, and I'm not blaming them for this, they are very zealous in their preoccupation with the safeguard of the documentation under their guard. And as the archives are a public institution, they cannot deny access to the archives themselves. Any citizen can just walk in, here's my ID, that's public property, you are entitled to it. As such, anyone can go in there. People at the archives don't know if you are a trained scholar, if you're an archaeologist, if you know how to handle a manuscript, or if you just come from fixing your car and your hands are greasy. So they tend to be very zealous with their documents. And when you're asking for stuff, if the document is deemed even slightly damaged, they refuse access.
I see.
There are ways around it. For a while, I had a good contact in there, and this is something common. It's not an illegal thing. You just have to figure it out. You have to find yourself a good contact inside, and then you can access some documentation while in one of the hidden labs inside the restoration labs. Sometimes they allow you to have supervised access. They have a restoration expert there.
Right.
And he'll just grab the document and just look through it and just say, okay, so you can handle these pages fine. But these pages here, when you need to turn them, you need to call me.
Right.
It's not like he has magic hands. He just turns them.
Right.
But if it gets damaged, at least it's not my fault.
It's on him, yeah.
It's on him.
It,
so,
yeah.
It's fine. So you have this different parts of the Portuguese Inquisition. You have different types of access to them. So the Lisbon part is it's morose and time-consuming to analyze, because looking at stuff online is very tiresome.
Painful, isn't it? Yes.
So you can do that at home, and that's okay. You're at home. You can entertain yourself with music or whatever, and you can look at the Lisbon Inquisition, and you can look at specific sections of the trials when you know how a trial looks like, to determine very easily if the trial has anything interesting to you or not. So that's one type of work, which is hard enough. It's tiring, physically and tiring. Not very mentally exhausting. It's just at the end of the day, you do need to take a break. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, again, looking at Coimbra and Évora, which are inquisitions that are really underexplored, and that seem to be, particularly the Coimbra Inquisition, seems to be where more locally produced magic books will be located. We're talking, for example, books of St. Cyprian. The references tend to be in the north, and the north of Portugal was the jurisdiction of the Coimbra Inquisition. So when you want to do the work that I do, looking for magic books, or at least information on magic books, and you want to look at maybe what was being done in Portugal by Portuguese individuals, you need to go into Coimbra. And to analyze that Inquisition, you need to go physically to the archives in Lisbon. Now, here is where the things gain a different dimension. When I did this at a certain point during the PhD, every other month I was going 1 week to Lisbon.
Gosh. It's not really an easy journey, is it? I mean, it's not far, but I remember that train ride.
I usually go by bus.
Bus?
Yeah.
Crikey.
I don't know. It's personal history. I don't have the habit of trains.
Right.
I enjoy trains, but the city I was born in, the train station is like 5 kilometers away.
Right.
I can't walk to a train station, and the lines that go through there are garbage. They don't go anywhere. They just go. Usually, the Leiria, where I'm from, you take the train somewhere else to get a different train because
to go to the good bit, right?
Yeah. So I don't have the habit of trains, so I just go with buses.
Okay, that's probably a much better journey, actually.
And then you are, or I did this. I'm not like portraying myself as like a victim here. I did this to myself.
You did, yes. Yes, I know you did.
You go to Lisbon, and I stranded myself in that city, in the archives, and the archives were open from like 9 until 7, so 10 hours, and you're just in there, 10 hours.
I remember, yeah.
Looking at, requesting document after document after document, and sometimes you spend entire days submitting requests that get denied and denied and denied and denied.
Or you don't find anything.
Or it's sometimes you get something and then you just go through it and there's nothing there, and then you just start to confront the time you're spending, and then you read the document 3 or 4 times because please just be maybe I missed something, just please be something here because I can't go back to requesting documents today. Tomorrow perhaps, but not. I just want something just so I can sleep. And it's a lot of that. It's maybe I'm exaggerating, but I won't be too far off if I say that 90% of archive work is nothing, is being confronted with disappointment
again and again,
and when you were in a situation like mine, sometimes in Portugal, my situation isn't unique, where for a moment there I had funding, but it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't using the money for anything.
So you couldn't go anywhere. Oh dear.
But then when I was able to travel, the funding ended, and you start thinking about the money you're spending by being there, which might sound shallow, but it's real.
It is real. It's not shallow at all.
And you have to pay rent.
You're funded entirely by the good graces of, the government or whoever gave you the money to exist whilst doing your PhD. You have to watch the money. You're not rolling in it, are you?
You start thinking of maybe this what can be called compound doubt. One just leads into the other,
Yeah.
And look, I'm not. This is my second PhD, and that sounds cool to say, but with 2 PhDs also comes the reality that I'm not a young man.
Yeah.
Am I wasting my time here, just day after day, document after document, not finding anything? Is this going anywhere? Am I ruining my life? If I even find something, will that be worth adding to the thesis? Will the thesis even be worth anything? And these things just pile up on top of each other. And the art of archive research is being able to silence that, or at least take it, or at least take the hit, and then next month be there again. People like to make these fancy analogies on particularly American sports. It's the sorry, you haven't done archive work. You don't know, because it's not.
No, I haven't.
If it was a sport, I can relieve my guilt on my opponent was stronger. He deserved to win.
Yeah.
I have nobody to blame except myself if I don't find anything.
Yeah.
And it's and at a certain point, and this is where I might be getting a bit romantic. At a certain point, you learn it's easy to talk when you're at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say, that's the nature of the game, it's the nature of the quest. But when you're in it, you don't see the nature of the quest. You just see your own suffering.
You don't see the end of it either, do you?
But you learn to ride that wave, and you learn something which valuable, which is silence. And the silence inside an archive can be deafening, and you just learn to write it. And that silence is a fundamental acquired. I don't want to say tool because that's too instrumental. It's what, in my opinion, creates a good, at least historian. That
Interesting.
You are able to silence yourself because you're too much to bear at that point.
Right.
And you are able to step outside and silence yourself, and then the document might say something.
I love that. Yes. That makes perfect sense. And sometimes, and I know this for a fact, the documents do say something. So to counter all of that, what's it like? I know you're jaded now. Okay, so like think back. What was it like the first time you found something really, really special?
Look, the first time I found something really, really special is a bad example. Because that was the Coimbra book.
That is not a bad example.
It's a bad example, and I'll explain why. Because it was easy. I was planning to write the opuscula. I was finishing my master's degree. I just said, "Oh, look at me! Let me check this library." Oh, I have a second master's degree. I'm so special. I'm just gonna walk into this library and ask for things, and I found a book of Saint Cyprian. And in my innocence, I would say, goddamn, people keep complaining nobody knows the books of Saint Cyprian. They never look for them. Look at me. First try. I got myself a book of Saint Cyprian. This is easy. So that doesn't count, even though it was a high point in my life.
It was a high point. I remember you were over the moon when you found that. All right, so about a hard one.
That one was one, and I remember that one. It was at the archives. I had gone there to...
Which archive?
The Portuguese National Archives.
Right.
I was there to look at Inquisition stuff.
Okay.
I was looking at the Inquisition of Coimbra. And I was looking at a particular type of document, which has in the meantime become one of my specialties. Not because I'm particularly good at it, but because I'm like the only one who looks at those.
Right.
It's the prosecutor's notebooks.
Oh, I love these.
I love the notebooks. They're awesome. Every single document that the Inquisition produced that did not give rise to an Inquisition trial is stored in a notebook. Hundreds of notebooks of thousands of pages. And they literally have everything.
And this is stuff that did not lead to a trial.
Did not lead to a trial.
So it must be easier on the soul to sift through.
You would assume so. If it would be easier on the soul if you go into the stories. Because you do find stories of victory there. You do find people being accused, and they are taken to the Inquisition, and they defend themselves, and they are honest and straightforward, and the Inquisition backs down. They can't make a case. So you find stories of victory there, including full-blown sorcerers and magicians, and they had ample evidence to condemn them, but something happened and they just couldn't pin them. So in that sense, it's easier on the soul if you're interested in the individual stories. But then there's the other aspect that when you know those notebooks can have anything in them, and you take an entire week to look at, I usually, a good day I could do 5. A very good day I could do 5. And this is another thing, because if I'm online, if I'm looking at the Lisbon Inquisition, I can only do 1 a day. And at the end of the day, I'm wasted. When you have a physical thing in front of you, it's you turn it around in like 2 hours. So on a good day, I could do 5. It's 10 hours. And anything can be there. And sometimes you don't find anything. So each turn of the page there's the potential of something gigantic, tremendous. There is potential of including a magic book in there. Maybe somebody delivered the magic book to the Inquisition. They couldn't find the guy who owned it. They kept the book as evidence in case they ever found it. Ends up in the notebooks. Anything can be there, and sometimes you don't find anything. And
so, what's the amazing thing that was really hard work that you found in these notebooks?
so after notebook after notebook, day after day, a whole week of this deathly
10 hours a day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this deathly silence of nothingness. It was already Friday, my last day. I was just thinking. I had two notebooks to go. I'm gonna turn this in a minute. At that point, I was thinking about rum and cigars.
Yeah.
Because that was my ritual. At the end of the week, I would go get wasted and smoke a cigar because I needed something to just put me in another state of mind. I was thinking about the rum and the cigars already.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm just turning it, and you find small books frequently, and they don't mean anything because maybe it's a collection of letters, maybe it's sometimes you get priests and they would have small collections of remedies, and they are interesting, but sometimes it's not that big a deal. Sometimes it's just regular prayers that you can find in a Marian devotional. So there's this notebook. It doesn't mean anything, and I keep reading through it and say, oh, blessings for water and holy water, which is fine, but not a red flag.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, oh, this is probably priest's cheat book, something. And I keep turning the pages. It was a very small thing, and it's one of those moments your heart skips a beat, or two or three. It was just blessings and prayers and blessings and prayers, and at a certain point there's a magic circle, and it's a moment of confusion, because you're particularly at the end of a week where you're on this flow of nothing, and all of a sudden there's something, and you have to remind yourself, wait, this is actually what I'm looking for. You've been disappointed so many times you're not expecting to find it anymore. It's like I wouldn't say self-sabotage, but you're simply not expecting it.
Yeah.
You're just going through the motions. I have to turn this page because I have to turn this page.
Could have easily missed it.
I'm not expecting anything, but all of a sudden there's a magic circle. So I turned back, and all the prayers were prayer to make holy water, prayer to bless a location, prayer to bless rods, and all. It's a treasure hunting book. It's a treasure hunting book. Just laying there, just for no apparent reason. A treasure hunting book, and then you read the denunciation that's attached, which I didn't read because horrible handwriting. Friday, I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I've seen some of that.
I'm not gonna pain myself reading what's in here. But then you go back, and it's a priest from this small town up north, and he said, "Look, there's this guy." He says his name, Bento Falcão da Frota. This guy, he's from Lisbon. He's a member of the royal household. He was a chamberlain of a prince. I learned later. He sent me this book. I want nothing to do with this book. Fuck this book. Fuck that guy. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out. Here, dear holy lords of the most apostolic Inquisition. Here, leave me out of it. And it was a treasure hunting book, and there's a moment of confusion there. You have because it's a lot of information all of a sudden.
Yeah. There's
a magic book. First of all, okay, treasure hunting, I know a bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
Who are all these people? What's happening? And you immediately try to construct the story, which in a state of confusion is not easy. But that the experience, which was your question.
Yeah.
What it feels like.
Yeah.
And we might be going into depressing realms again, but again,
It's
I'm a
okay.
melancholic person. To me, I can't say anybody else. This is my experience. You feel like you're not solely your what you're doing there, not solely your presence at that moment in that place, doing that, not only your PhD and not only your thesis and your ideas, but you feel like your life is justified. For a moment, you feel there is something that I can do in this world that nobody else can, and if I wasn't here, wouldn't be done. And that is finding this book right now. This moment justifies me, at least as a scholar, which I take as a profound identifier. It's not a job.
Yes.
It's something that a person is. This justifies me, at least right now. I have a point in existing. And that's a big relief. That's a big burden off your shoulders for a few minutes.
For a few minutes.
But then it falls back on, obviously.
Well,
I still had another notebook to look at. So everything came rushing back.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, these are the little ups and downs that people who, like myself, who haven't done the whole PhD road trip don't really understand. I mean, I've had little glimpses of it, but nothing so profound as the horror or the joy that doing a PhD must entail. But it's done now.
Yeah.
And all of this came together in a really fascinating collection, really, of stories about the people who were involved in ritual magic, learn magic, in Portugal, a very overlooked territory in the whole esoteric studies field. And I like to focus on Lisbon and the cosmopolitan sort of feel of all these different nations. I liked the idea of these nations within Portugal.
Yeah.
And just the trading back and forth of magic. In the shape of books, of course. Lots of book dealers, book printers. I approve. But it's you've put Portugal on the map now, whereas before it was obviously quite overlooked, sort of in the English speaking world. I'll say maybe that's not a completely accurate statement. I know the field of esoteric studies is quite young, but still, it astounds me from my position in England that some country just over the channel has been as overlooked as Portugal. And we've talked about why that might have been.
Yeah, I would say there are a few reasons for it. I had something brilliant to say, but I started looking at the booze here.
Pour it out.
Escaped.
What are we drinking? What is this?
It's a risoli. It's a local. They call it a liqueur, although calling it's a translator's false friend. It's not a liquor. It's a big mix of things. It's 16% alcohol, so it's kind of like wine, but very sweet, very strong on anise and star anise, and coffee. Has coffee in here.
Delicious.
It's
highly recommended.
One of the advantages of having Moorish past, that they tended to bring in good spices and make very interesting drinks. Obviously, good Muslims wouldn't drink the alcohol, but we had plenty of not very good Muslims. Thank God for them. And
this was a stronghold, wasn't it? Before it was taken by the. Well, not
this one, and
you can't say Spain, can you? But
saying this was a big stronghold is a.
Well, not a big stronghold, but it was a stronghold. I mean, look where it is. Nobody was getting here.
Everything at one point south of the Asturias was a Muslim stronghold. So this isn't special about it.
No, the location is special.
Yes.
I mean,
we are in a city wedged between two cliffs.
Yeah.
There are there is like one street. And look, they're doing that whole business. What is it, Dubai or the United Arab Emirates about a linear city? We have one. It's right here.
It is.
If I like it because I'm here and it's beautiful, but you shouldn't build a city like this.
You should. Look, this is the only medieval part of town that I've been in any city where the road is a straight line and you can find your way around.
Yes, because it's along that road.
Yes, that's it. That's what you get. That road and some roads next to it, although not on one side because that's a cliff.
Yeah, and then on the other side another cliff.
Yeah.
What was your question again?
I can't remember. So, well, I don't know. Oh, why was Portugal overlooked? Why do you think Portugal was overlooked? Was it overlooked or am I talking shit?
No, it was overlooked. It was overlooked by both local scholars, which is more baffling than anything, and international scholars. And look, I approached, when I started, I had very small evidence that learned magic would exist here. Because my supervisor and another guy, very good scholar, from, I think he used to be at King's College at least, Francisco Tencourt. They had written books on magic in Portugal, mostly focusing on folk magic, because you have a bunch of folk magic.
Yeah.
And when I started, by the way, when I started studying magic, I was all about the folk magic. And
when was that?
Sinful. Like,
just let me digress. When did you start to have an interest in studying magic?
I was reading on magic and occultism from the mindset of a practitioner. Although if I look back and I am honest with myself, I was never much of a practitioner.
Right.
But I was interested in the ideas, in the cosmology. I was looking for something to do. I don't know. When I started, the idea of studying magic was when I was doing the translation of the Book of St. Cyprian in 2014. Before that, and I could tell that I couldn't handle it. Not that I quit, but I was missing something. There was a lot of information that I knew should exist to explain certain things, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know where to find it.
Right.
Nobody was talking about it. So that's when I felt I should look at this with a different kind of eye. I can't just go with a gut feeling. I can't just reduce things to 19th century occultism. Because, look, for good and bad, let's say something about occultism. They can fit everything in there. they spin it.
We sure can.
If it doesn't fit, then you just go with the gematria, and then you just play with some numbers, and all of a sudden it fits. In that way, in that sense, there is a brilliance to it.
There is. I love that about it, but I hate that about it as well.
Exactly. It's the strength and the great weakness.
Yeah.
And I decided that I should stop playing with. I was big on gematria. At a certain point, I used to write small little essays.
What?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I was at the point that I realized that I could make any argument, because I can, if all else fails, I can just relate things through a number.
I see.
So at that point I realized this is not providing a proper service, not only to a potential reader, but more importantly the document.
And it makes sense with the Cyprian stuff that you would be initially attracted to the folklore, because
so the Book of St.
Cyprian.
Cyprian was a lot. My best interpretation of it was, this is a lot of folk magic right here.
Yes.
As I've learned in the meantime, it's a bit more complicated than that. It's not folk magic, but there's a lot going on in there.
Yes.
So that's when I decided to start looking into magic from more an academic perspective.
Right.
And then I got these books from these guys.
Yeah.
José Pedro Paiva, my supervisor.
Yep.
Superstição e bruxaria num país sem caça às bruxas. Witchcraft and superstition in a country without witch hunt. Very interesting book.
I would like to read that book, but I imagine it's not in English.
In Portuguese.
Yeah.
I know he started
That's
translating.
fine.
He
Google
started
Translate.
translating some of his work into English. He's mostly at this point a scholar of the Inquisition, so he has a very good history of the Portuguese Inquisition written with Giuseppe Marcocci, an Italian guy, and they are working on publishing that in English. I don't know if he's planning on publishing more.
Okay.
Then I started looking at Francisco Betancourt, O Imaginário da Magia, The Imaginary of Magic, and Betancourt has papers written like in the 80s. His book is from 87. He has a few papers written in English. You can find a few of him, yeah. There's one which I would advise. It gives a good introduction to the issue of magic in the Portuguese Inquisition, which is...
Are these online? We can find them online? Maybe we could post links at least to the comments?
I have a digital version of one, but I'm not sure if I found it online or simply it was at the University of Amsterdam. I remember the University of Amsterdam had the book where it was a book chapter, I digitalized it to me.
Oh, well, that's we won't share that, but links. If we can find links to some of these names,
sure,
that would be great.
The article, I think, is called Portugal, a Scrupulous Inquisition, something like that.
Right.
I'm pretty sure if you write...
It is an interesting one, the Portuguese one versus the Spanish one. And for a long time, like a very long time, I had no idea there was a difference. And I really want everyone to know that there is a difference. But that's a rant for another day.
Yeah. Their jurisdiction is different legal procedure. We have very interesting cases. And I had a colleague that used to work on this, and she had a bachelor's degree in law. So she looked at the law. How did it function?
Wow.
And you had, because there was a lot of cooperation between inquisitions, particularly during the Philippine period, which Portugal and Castile had the same king. So there was a lot of good interaction. And the Spanish Inquisition was after a guy. The guy crossed the border into Portugal. It's a different jurisdiction, so they sent a letter to the Lisbon Inquisition. So our guy ran away over there. Can you please arrest him? And the Lisbon Inquisition asked, okay, what are the charges? What are the testimonies? And they sent them to the Lisbon Inquisition, and they just said, we can't prosecute this guy. You only have one witness. The Lisbon Inquisition needed two.
Right.
So we're not touching anything. Yeah, this is your problem.
So Inquisition territories are like the states in America, like, oh, I've gone to a different state. You can't.
And it's different legislations, and some things were transportable, others weren't. The law was different.
That's crazy.
And I'm pretty sure the opposite would happen in other cases. That something that was important in the Portuguese Inquisition, in the Spanish Inquisition, nobody cared.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure lots of people got off that way too.
Yeah.
Yes, we're slowly going towards your question about...
We're getting there.
So there was these two guys,
right?
And they wrote their books on the Portuguese Inquisition, and the books are very good. I will say that some might be methodologically dated, but you can't blame them for that.
No,
that's they were doing the best as people thought was the best at that time.
Yes.
Particularly Betancourt, he wrote his in 87, and then Paiva wrote his in 97.
Yeah.
So, it's... And novelties of all kinds, including scholarly novelties, take a while to get to Portugal, particularly in the 80s and 90s.
And why is that?
Insularity, and there's an aspect that people tend to underestimate. Maybe it's not so serious anymore because the world has changed a big deal since the 90s.
Oh, yes.
But you cannot ignore the peripheral position, the literal peripheral position of Portugal in Europe. We have one border. It's Spain, and then it's the ocean. Anything that comes in here needs to go through Spain. Spain, particularly in the 80s and 90s, is somewhat of a conservative society. They take their Catholicism very seriously in all its good and bad, and all its beautiful and all its horror. So during those days, well, look, people underestimate how harsh the Portuguese dictatorship was, not in terms of physical violence, although there was plenty of that, but in mental violence of the damage that it did to the Portuguese psyche, if such a thing exists, that we're not prone to novelty. I'm not saying we're special. Plenty of people go through this. It's a very sickly form of the if it's not broken, don't fix it mentality, to the point that we can see it's actually broken. It needs fixing, but nobody believes it's broken in order to fix it. Novelty would be slow moving.
Right.
At those days, and not for nothing, the things that brought the great culture shocks came by way of music.
Right.
That we always had these forward-thinking, cosmopolitan musicians, many of them from Porto. Porto is a very cosmopolitan city, always was, who would bring in some new ideas on music and this, and they tended to shock the system a number of times. But it was slow-moving on all fronts. And even though in the 90s, internationally, the ideas on the scholarship historical study of magic and religion was already pretty kind of well formed. There was still, and there is still, a certain notion that there's what's the correct phrasing? The category of religion in Portugal, it's still hard to convince people that other things fit in it besides Christianity. That if somebody in Portugal presents themselves as a scholar of religion, what he actually is a scholar of Portuguese Catholicism.
I see.
Religion as a category.
Yes.
People haven't...
It's a Catholic country, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not as, and again, in all its good and all its bad, not as formally Catholic as Spain, because they love their ritual over here.
Yeah.
In Portugal, not so much. But it's more of it's soft Catholicism.
Right.
Most people will claim to be Catholic, but not actually go to church. It's just a way of being.
It's a social
thing. It's being culturally Catholic. It's like being culturally Muslim or culturally Jewish. Yeah, you go with the motion, you respect the tradition, you might go to temple or to the synagogue once in a while and to church and go to baptisms and masses, but you're not really living it. That's most of the situation in Portugal.
I see.
I'm not saying Spain is all that different, but they do love their ritual.
They do appear to.
Yeah, and in this city of Cuenca,
I would
advise everybody to just Google Semana Santa de Cuenca, and it's quite the spectacle.
I would go to church here. Totally.
Probably, yeah.
Every day.
It feels worthwhile.
It does. In that cathedral, it absolutely does.
So this was the methodology was a bit slow, but again, I'm not blaming these two guys.
No.
But the issue was their books focus a lot on folk magic, and I started my interest again. It started with folk magic because I thought that was the correct avenue to follow if I wanted to understand the books of Saint Cyprian.
I see.
And my point was still I want to check the books of Saint Cyprian, so I'm going with folk magic. Then I eventually went with I started investigating I started going through, like, I think this started when I was talking about the Opuscula Cipriani. I started going into the Inquisition myself, looking at things, and if you look at, apart from the books I did find for that giant volume, most of the information I extracted from the Inquisition was either prayers of Saint Cyprian or small incantations involving Cyprian from folk magic. And I was very happy with that. I decided that this why I abandoned physics is a whole other story. I've mentioned it in a few other podcasts of people.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I know you had a PhD already. I know you were all ready. But physics is so far beyond me. And let's face it, now so far in your past that I feel like this doctor is the achievement that is important now. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You've been working towards this
sense.
for a very long time.
And
it seems to be this is a great love of yours.
And look, another tangent, but at this point, I can say I am a better historian than I ever was a physicist, even though I will defend I was a very good experimentalist. I wasn't a good theoretician, but I functioned well in the lab. But I'm infinitely better historian than I ever was a physicist.
You are a very sharp historian. You have blown my tiny mind numerous times with your insights.
And this is there, like I said a minute ago, there was a revelation of identity here. Mm-hmm. Physics I was never really a physicist, I've come to know. Physics was something that was simply available to me in college in Portugal. It wasn't unpleasant, and it was a reliable job, which is saying something.
Yes, I know.
History isn't something that I do. It's something that's lived. So, as an individual, I am, again, romantic language. I'm much more myself. Mm. And even though I am a depressed individual, I am infinitely happier doing history than I was physics. I could do physics 8 hours a day and then go home and do history. I did that for a tiny bit.
Yeah.
But this is what this is where I believe that I can contribute something to something.
Well, I feel you already have. You know what I mean? I feel like you have contributed so many things, several things. I mean, not there's what you've contributed to historical studies, okay, but there's also what you've contributed to the occult world, I'll call it. You know, the world of people who take that book of Saint Cyprian and use it, and it caused an explosion. It was part of this wave of interest in Cyprianic material. And you were right there.
It was the right time.
It was the right time, the right moment, and you have to take credit for the fact that you're the one that wrote that particular book, that was part of the impact that Cyprian was having, and continues to have. So you've done something for two, not necessarily separate areas, but certainly two different groups of people, and it's even better when those groups overlap, and I can attest to that.
Yeah. I had a bunch of things in my head while you were talking. Oh, I can say this again. I forgot all about them. Well, the issue.
Let's drink more. That'll help.
Yeah. Nothing better on the radio than hearing people eat.
Well, they can turn it off. It's going to be on YouTube. Just click the off button. God.
On the Book of St. Cyprian, on the publication.
Yeah.
I could read that as a cosmic drama. That St. Cyprian was doing something, and he wanted to break into the wider world, and I was his humble servant.
I felt it.
But
just
part of that silence I was mentioning a minute ago is quieting that part of the story.
I hear you.
But
but I felt it as well.
These are complicated issues for historians to speak.
They are. I mean, you finished that book, and you have expressed to me, and I can't quote you, but I seem to recall you expressing to me at some point along our long journey of friendship that you'd rewrite some bits of that now in your introduction to the Book of Saint Cyprian.
Yeah.
But the way you finished it, your introduction with what this book represented was freedom, right? if I recall correctly, that book was published in May of 2014. And three things, very personal things that I won't go into here, but three very personal and very profound, like life-changing things happened to me upon the publication of that book. One of which especially actually freed me from the previous decades of, there's no polite word, so I'll say no word, of not being free, right? Let's put it that way. It was not like, oh, look, this has happened. It was profoundly life-changing. And all the pressure I felt from, if you want to be a historian about it, and a presumed Saint Cyprian and Saint Justina behind me as I worked, that was the culmination of all of that for me. So that's the occultist side.
And when I received my author copies, I was working at the Netherlands at a scientific publisher, Elsevier, being very handsomely paid. Mm-hmm. I got fired like on the spot, and that was like,
yes.
All right, I had already applied.
Profoundly life-changing.
I had
Freedom
already
from the corporate
yeah.
assholes. Yeah.
At the time, it didn't feel like it. I had already applied for the master's degree in Amsterdam, but I was still thinking: do I go for it? Do I stay and just have a 9-to-5 job? That really cleared the doubts.
Yeah.
You can't have a 9-to-5 job anymore because you're fired.
Yeah. 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 Like that, these synchronicities that are like, damn, okay, maybe there's something to this.
And I keep trying to crawl to your original question. These two scholars published their books.
Okay, yes, they did.
And I was going to the folk magic because of the Book of St. Cyprian, because I wanted to study books of St. Cyprian, and I thought, folk magic is the way to go.
Yes.
All right, I do the master's degree, still with this in mind. And my original project for my master's degree was to do a survey of folk magic in the 19th century, using the Portuguese ethnography, which is a 10-volume thing that José Leitão Vasconcelos wrote. And I listed, I still have this list and I will use it eventually. I listed every single magical procedure he mentions. It's like 3,000.
Crikey, that's...
And my idea was,
epic.
my original thesis idea was to make a survey of these and try to figure it out. And at that time, I realized that there were two systems of folk magic coexisting in Portugal. These days I know what they are. Back then I didn't know, so maybe it's a good idea I didn't do that because I would have fucked it up.
Oh.
Now I know how to read those two systems of magic clearly. Because I looked beyond the 19th century, further back, and I could already tell where that was happening back then too. Anyway, my thing with folk magic all the way. I signed up for a PhD in Coimbra. After a long story of disappointment, I applied for a bunch of places of scholarships. There's nothing. And Coimbra was, first of all, Paiva was there. So he knew something about magic. I might disagree with his methods, but he understood, more important, he understood the documentation, which is something that people don't realize. The value of knowing how a document looks like, knowing where to find it, knowing how it's structured. These are all valuable things. For simply knowing, for example, our situation here, that the Cuenca Inquisition is located in Cuenca and not in Madrid it doesn't sound like much. It's a fundamental piece of research a fundamental piece of information that is really valuable. Knowing where the archives are, knowing which early modern institution, where their library ended up.
And which door to use, because on the Historical Archives website, they're still pointing you at the Inquisition headquarters.
They are, okay.
Not at the door past the dead people.
So my supervisor knew all of that in Portugal. He knew where to go to find the accurate documentation if I ever needed. I need to know where the library of the Jesuit College of Santo Antão is. It's over there. So in that, he was excellent in that. He didn't know about Cuenca either.
Well, who did?
So he was very good at that. And there also, obviously, I didn't have much access to funding. So being in Portugal was some added security. Because first of all, the country is fairly cheap.
Yeah.
And my family is from there. Should all else fail, I had a place to crash. I wouldn't go hungry. I wouldn't be homeless.
Yes.
So that's the added security. So I just went in there. And then, because I had found a very interesting trial, this is where all it started. I was still thinking of the folk magic.
Mm-hmm.
I had already written a project for Amsterdam that got rejected. And I was basically going to reuse that to submit eventually to say, this is the thesis I want to do on folk magic. And it was on the Inquisition. But in the meantime, I wrote a paper for one of my subjects and it's added to the thesis, the reception of Agrippa in Portugal. About this case I found of this one guy who had that stumbled upon the book of Agrippa, and what did that cause? What was the impact of this on his life? How did the Inquisition react to this one book there?
Was it on the index yet by this time?
Yeah, it was. This is 1581,
right.
And the first indexes were like first half of the 16th century, I think. So it was already an indexed book. And I wrote that paper. It was fairly good. I still like it. I then eventually published it in a journal called Melancholia. Mm-hmm. It's on my academia page anyway. Mm-hmm. And the subject that I was writing it for, my supervisor was the professor at it.
Right.
So I submitted this paper. I wrote this. And then he read it, he evaluated it, and then we had a sit down in his quality of supervisor. He said, that paper you wrote, this folk magic, screw this folk magic. This is what you need to do. Because folk magic, I already did folk magic. Betancourt already did folk magic. Nobody did learn magic. This is the key to your PhD right here. And I had to agree with him that if I was planning on having some kind of career and have the maximum impact with my work and the thesis, I should write about something that's truly new. And that would have been learned magic. And here's where we finally got to where your question is. There was no information on folk magic. Paiva and Betancourt had noticed a few cases. Betancourt, again, I don't blame him, but he placed folk magic and learned magic as part of the same cosmology, the same mentality, which it isn't.
Really?
He didn't see
so
the
he
difference.
was 97 or
87.
in the 80s. So was there even that distinction then, really? I mean, really, in when talking about the type of magic that he was talking about, was there really a distinction then in historical
honestly,
studies?
I'm not sure. He
I'm
just
not sure
assumed,
either.
His fundamental error is assuming an essential magic mentality. That this is something that certain individuals have.
Right, I see.
But with that assumption, he made tremendous work.
Yes.
It's still very thorough, it's still very good. But he's just assuming that there is such a thing as magic mentality. He doesn't realize or didn't see at that point that there's no such thing as magic mentality and there's no such thing as religious mentality or scientific mentality. People have the mentality of the time. In the early modern period, believing in magic was not a form of mentality, it was not a superstition, it was reality.
It was reality, wasn't it? We've
proven
time and time again.
The universe was, the belief was that Christianity is real.
Yes, absolutely.
That is how the universe functions. And the church itself, by prohibiting magical activities, guaranteed that magic was real. Magic being illegal, it wasn't illegal because it was fraud, it was illegal because it was real. So believing in magic is just a different aspect of just being a person inserted in that type of community, that type of society. So there is no magic mentality. or rather, it's not distinguishable from religious mentality or from any other mentality of any one time. So that was his issue. But again, it's fine. The book is still very good. I cannot overstress this. So yeah, and Paiva did look a bit into magic books because Paiva's thesis is mostly focused on not exactly legal procedure, but the definition of heresy and how this frames the persecution of magic.
Okay.
So he makes a distinction between books, because the books as objects have their own jurisdiction associated with the indexes, and then he makes a distinction with just folk magic.
Charms and such.
Charms and things that you say and do, and illiterate people. So he realizes that there's a difference here, although he doesn't go into the detail of it.
Right.
Because, again, his point is just looking at the law.
Yes.
How was the Inquisition reacting to these things?
Yes.
But again, he notices a difference in reaction, but doesn't scrutinize what that difference entails in terms of practice. So the point was, nobody had really focused on folk magic, on learned magic. And another blank, which means I need to drink something else. Wait.
That's all right. That's why we're here, to drink, to eat, to talk shit about history.
I'm gonna eat one of these.
Those lines are becoming blurred now, aren't they? Folk and learned a little bit.
Yeah, that's another conclusion I'm getting to. Now, there was no information on learned magic. To the point that I've had at least one scholar, and I'm going to be an asshole here. I try not to be. I'm using scholar very generously.
We do our best, right?
Because he's not a historian, he's a philosopher. Philosophers are fucking idiots. Because, and I have a justification for this, it's not gratuitous. They believe the shit inside their head is real. They make up things inside their head, and then somehow they believe that somehow this relates to reality. And they don't look at the facts, and they don't look at documents. And I would have this same argument if I was still a physicist. Because I've read my share of Portuguese philosophers when I was in my esoteric stage.
Yeah.
And they would say things about physics that they believe it's real. Okay, this guy is a philosopher. Okay. I'm not going to name him. If somebody can read Portuguese and goes to my academia page, you can figure it out with it. I entered into an academic debate with this man. And there were scholars who would say there was no such thing as learned magic in Portugal, or at least no books have been found. As if the Book of St. Cyprian is not on sale in every fucking bookstore in Portugal. And there was simply no idea of folk magic, of learned magic. Nothing. And how can this be? First of all, I'm not even... Let's go soft.
Let's go soft.
Paiva and Betancourt noted the existence of folk magic. And they didn't even look hard at it. And they just randomly looking at things, in the Inquisition, they found references to them. So what would happen if somebody actually cared to look for it? And then, for a hot minute there, Portugal was the center of the fucking world.
Really? When was this?
People from all over Europe, the wealthiest of people, the most miserable of people, the most ambitious of people, and the best of people crossed that country. How the fuck does magic not exist there? How? A global commercial hub. How do people not bring books into that place?
They did quite a bit.
Turns out. Yeah. And that was the thesis. I went into it again, not too happy about it, because like I said, I wanted to look at folk magic to figure out books of St. Cyprian. But joke's on me. Turns out I found books of St. Cyprian anyway while studying learned magic.
Yes.
So it worked out in the end.
They're a little hybrid sort of book, aren't they? I mean, there are many hybrids, but I like that That it tricked you. I like that it tricked you. You thought it was folk magic. It turned out to have some learned magic.
Yes, because that's
It's a usable manual, isn't it? It's service magic.
service magic entirely. Even though it's hard to say when you have too little evidence of anything, it's hard to. I mean, you can literally say anything, but it's hard to stand by it.
Yes.
Particularly if you're a historian that's preoccupied with how your work might be interpreted in the future. From the evidence so far gathered, service magic. So let's just keep it chill.
Perfect. Perfect.
And you would know this. I have found during my PhD, one of the books I did find was a very abnormal book of Saint Cyprian that technically might be looked at as service magic, but it's about finding treasure. It's a very practical thing. I can clearly see some possible extrapolations a practitioner might do from there to something else, because it places a great deal of emphasis on making pacts with particular spirits.
It does.
I can see somebody playing with that for more of a ritual, ceremonial magic kind of mentality, which is legitimate. The book does teach you how to make a pact with Lucifus Focale.
It does indeed.
In using non-Solomonic methods. So obviously an influence from the Grand Grimoire, but bypassing Grand Grimoire methodologies, a new way to work with the spirit. So there is that. So it's not solely service magic. Although in the early modern period, what we do have seems to be service magic. And there was a big problem. And I had to rattle my brain a bit, but not too much. When you're dealing with a duality, and a single axis between folk magic and learned magic. I should say learned magic, and not learned magic.
I know.
Because Peter Forshaw, dear Peter Forshaw, my master's supervisor, he chews me out every time I say learned magic, because and his excuse is, I'm a Virgo, which I don't buy, but I love him anyway.
Well, I can get away with saying learned magic because I'm just a plebeian.
Oh, sure. I was about to say something inaccurate. I was about to call you a colonial, but you're technically not.
You what?
You're a native.
Take it back.
We were talking. Oh yes, the axis between folk and learned magic. Back to highbrow, complicated.
That's right.
Words. When you're looking at things solely oscillating between these two extremes, it's fairly easy. It's okay. Books, because they're written, require some level of education. Learned magic.
Makes sense.
Folk magic, it's mostly transmitted orally. You don't need to know much. Sometimes the learning is pretty much organic inside your own community. You just learn these things. Folk magic there. But then, when I started looking at books of Saint Cyprian, because I could fit them into a learned magic perspective, because first of all, they're books. You need to know how to read and write.
It helps.
So, you cannot exclude them from learned magic, from the general milieu of people with some level of education. However, every time I saw or found a reference to the Book of Saint Cyprian in the Inquisition, it seemed to be dealing with preoccupations mostly common to folk magic. So it was a learned magic book looking to fix folk magic problems.
I see.
And this causes a problem. Not a problem, but when you find this, you know that the distinction is false. And everybody knows that. We know that there is no such thing as folk magic, and we know that there is no such thing as learned magic. These are academic tools, something to make our life easier. But there's this object, and the tool is breaking. The object does not fit. And we cannot make the evidence fit the theory. If that happens, we need to change the theory. So new methods, new tools, new approaches needed to be had to deal with the books of Saint Cyprian. Because what seemed to be the case was that while I did find ample evidence of, let's say, European learned magic in Portugal. Keys of Solomon, astral magic, Picatrix,
yep.
Agrippa's, Paracelsus, all of that, which again inserts Portugal in the European map of learned magic. It's a point that now exists. We now know the channels of communication between this country and the other country, how books came in, how they came out, who was bringing books, who was reading them. So this exists as a thing in itself.
Who was printing them?
Who was printing them, who was distributing them, who was making copies, what authorities were looking the other way, which authorities were actually interested in them. We had inquisitors who were interested in magic. The Inquisitor General was very fond of the Key of Solomon.
Of course he was.
He was. There's a eulogism I used in the.
But these guys were human too. You know, that's they.
The Inquisitor General, in particular, Fernão Martinho Mascarenhas, I would debate if he was actually human.
Well, some of them weren't human, but some of them had human interests.
Fucking asshole, that guy.
There were some, yes.
Even among the Inquisitors, he shines. The other Inquisitors thought he was an asshole. That's how bad he was.
Well, there's always one. No, I'm not saying they were perfect beings. I'm saying, you know, they had human interests. So
I use the word. I'm not sure if it qualifies as I invented it, because I just put a few words together and it made sense. Bibliokleptomania.
Oh my God.
The Inquisitor General had that problem. He would arrest people.
That's good for you, right? Historical studies.
Sure.
If he saved them all.
He would arrest people, and if they had nice-looking libraries, he would just take them. And he would make illegal copies of magic books because he was a bibliophile with no scruples. So there's this side of magic, these international grimoires. I avoid the word grimoire, by the way, but for comprehension purpose, these grimoires, these magic books, these famous international authors, that's coming in and out of Portugal, no issue there. But
let's stick with magic books, because grimoire, according to Owen Davies and David Rankin, is a very specific type of magic book. So let's just say magic books.
Yeah, even though Bernd Christian Otto has a very interesting article. I think he just calls it Western Learned Magic, and then there's something in it. And it's a methodology paper, and he's just describing a way of circumscribing Western Learned Magic.
Okay.
I don't fully agree with him. I understand his points. I don't agree with them. And he does make some criticism to Owen Davis, saying that he was too generous with the word grimoire. And I also agree with Otto in that point. That I think the expression he uses, he magializes certain books that aren't really that much about magic. But he projects the category of magic upon them.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
David gives a little bit narrower of a definition. You know, it must contain A, B, and C in order to be a grimoire.
In his book, the grimoires, are you still talking
Grimoire
about?
Encyclopedia. David Rankin does give a bit more of a
I haven't
concise
I have the book,
definition. That's fine.
I have used that book as a reference.
Yep.
Often, may I add. I haven't read the intro. I'm a lady.
I know exactly how that goes. Yes.
I'm a scholar. I haven't read the full book in 7 years.
I know.
I have intensely read chapters of books, but full books are a rarity these days.
I know. God, it's terrible, isn't it?
So there were these grimoires.
Right.
And what was disturbing to me, because I was finding references to books of St. Cyprian, not much, but some, that they existed in entirely distinct circles from these other grimoires, which meant that we had these two. Let's just group external magic books into one. Yeah. Then you have the books of St. Cyprian. These two categories, these two forms of book, were definitely part of the same learned world,
right?
By the virtue of being books.
Yes.
But that was the only thing they shared.
There was no crossover.
There was no crossover. The people who were using one book were not using the other. The preoccupations addressed by one book are typically not addressed by the other. They were distinct. They were separated. They weren't communicating. Even though as time moves on and we arrive at the 19th century, we know they communicated later.
Yeah.
But in the 16th century, 17th century, they didn't seem to be communicating.
Okay.
Which, first of all, allows me to make the great academic statement that we had two distinct traditions of learned magic in Portugal, which is wonderful.
But is it true? Can you back that up with evidence?
I think so, because if you add a little complexity to the simple learned magic, folk magic axis, and you start to look, and you can only I only realized this when I started looking at folk magic in the context of my thesis. So I was looking at learned magic, but at a certain point it became obvious that I cannot, because the distinction between learned and folk anyway is false. To remove folk magic from this story of learned magic is an artificiality. I would be creating a deformation. So I need to account for folk magic and if and why, if it interacts with learned magic, and what are the consequences of this. And I realized that there are plenty of overlaps, which then led me to understand that learned magic and folk magic have that's a socioeconomic axis between people with education and non-education, but these also vary according to geography. That you have a type of learned magic happening in cosmopolitan centers, you have a type of learned magic happening in rural settings, you have a type of folk magic happening in rural settings, and you have a type of folk magic happening in urban cosmopolitan centers. So my solution to the problem of why this wasn't interacting was that your run-of-the-mill international grimoire, your magic books, by virtue of being part of a European literary tradition, tend to mostly appear or be common in cosmopolitan urban centers, because that's where the printing houses are, that's where the bookstores are, that's where the people with money to buy magic books migrate to. And then outside of this, there were equally learned individuals who would produce magic books, but they were mostly preoccupied with rural preoccupations. Again, service magic. And the same thing with folk magic. In a rural environment, you would have people with very specific rural preoccupations, and then in the cities, very specific urban preoccupations.
Very specific, yes.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing was simply saying that we need more categorization, because we are scholars, we like to complicate. So instead of looking at learned magic, let's say, our international magic books, these are urban folk magic. Our books of St. Cyprian are rural folk magic, learned magic.
Yeah.
So there is a rural and urban distinction. Now, obviously, the books of St. Cyprian are a learned object preoccupied with rural preoccupations. A bit of a repetition there. Rural preoccupations, which are the same, which are addressed by folk magic in rural settings, which then means that as a service book, they will include practices from rural folk magic in them.
Some of those practices could only be done in a rural setting.
Yes.
And I say this because I lived it. I made a tiny devil in a steaming pile of manure, which you wouldn't get living in the heart of the city, generally speaking. Do you know what I mean? Some of those spells are clearly designed for rural use.
So the as a learned object, the books of St. Cyprian are, as a learned object in a rural setting, they are permeable to folk magic in a rural setting. So
that is perfect.
That makes it, when you're just looking at this duality of learned and folk, you have a hard time grasping that.
Yeah.
But then, and this is the cool part, and I have a whole chapter on it, it's probably one of my favorite ones, if this happens in a rural setting, this also happens in an urban setting. And you have people picking up elements from your cosmopolitan learned magic books, your Agrippas, your Keys of Solomon, and then mixing it with elements arising from urban folk magic. This very aggressive, very dynamic, very Catholic kind of magic that deals with harsh, troublesome spirits. You can always make the argument that folk magic is kind of it's an expression of Catholicism, which it is, and it doesn't.
Well, certainly in Europe up to a certain century,
there's a benefic
is,
aspect to it, a social component to it, following the Marcel Mauss definition that he would describe magic as being antisocial, and folk magic isn't antisocial.
No, it isn't, no.
But then you have this urban folk magic, which is just harsh and it's nasty.
Could be antisocial, couldn't
Could
it?
be even though those practitioners serve a social function, you can look at them, because they would look at themselves as criminals. They knew damn well they shouldn't be doing that, and if they got caught, the law would.
And some of the ones you discuss in your thesis are pretty dastardly characters. I mean, I fell in love with some of the guys, but you wouldn't want them as friends.
So, arising from this folk culture in cities, you also have books.
Yep.
And which the books of Saint Cyprian are simply there are books emerging from the overlap of learned and folk culture in Portugal. The books of Saint Cyprian turn out to simply be one particular expression of this overlap happening in a rural setting. Eventually transports into the cities when the 19th century comes along.
Yeah.
But that was one of the big conclusions, that there's this other strand of literature being produced in Portugal that nobody noticed, and the books of Saint Cyprian are a part of this other thing. That is the books of Saint Cyprian not so much, but there is this offshot of your international magic books that get transformed into other things. Did I answer the question?
I think so. I think so. I think you did. Yes.
We
are now pouring yet more booze.
Yes.
It's fine.
I've spoken for a long time and I need to...
That's fine.
It's my vocal cords.
We probably... I mean... Should we should probably wrap it up.
Do you want to do a Joe Rogan in a 4-hour one?
We could. I mean, I'm not bothered. I'm here with the booze. Look at all this food. I mean, I'm going to be doing this all
Is there anything
night.
you want to address? Let me see.
Is there anything I want to address? Well, this is just a friendly, informal chat. I want to address, I don't know, because I'm a budding historian, of my little stint at academia has changed my entire perspective on
ask me and I'll
history.
I'll act surprised. Ask me about ask me about methodological agnosticism, and ask me about the distinction between a scholar and a practitioner.
Oh, let's do that one. What is the distinction in your mind between a scholar and a practitioner, and can they ever overlap? Is there a Venn diagram?
God damn, that's a good question.
Yes, it is. Thank you for thinking of it.
Here's the thing. And this is these are thoughts that have crossed my mind many times, and that are in part inform my desire to come to places like Cuenca, and my appreciation for places like Cuenca. There is something, there is a method, an idea that I will stand by and I will defend as the appropriate, correct way to do history. That is methodological agnosticism. That you should not write a history book, or you should not work in history on the topics of magic, religion, or the topics of belief by taking a position.
No position.
No position.
Nothing.
Even if you are yourself a practitioner.
Man, I had a position when I wrote my paper. God. Doing it wrong. All right, so elaborate.
You can be a practitioner all you want. If you are writing a history paper, you need to step outside of yourself and again find that silence that you learn in the archives. And you silence yourself and you allow the documentation to speak. You are supposed to be kind of a mouthpiece. Obviously, you can never remove yourself entirely, otherwise, because it doesn't speak by itself. And impersonal work, one might say, is impossible and even undesirable.
What if
there is always a piece of the historian that needs to be in there?
Yeah, but what if you really desperately believe in your argument? Your research has shown your argument to be true. Like, I got really excited when this happened, and I could not. There was no silence. It was all like, the bells were ringing. Right. I was like, oh my God, I'm right.
If you have an argument and it's solidly backed, you don't have an issue. The only problem is, which paper are you talking about?
I'm not telling. I don't want people... I'm not telling.
I
am talking about my final paper.
If you're writing about...
Yeah.
If you're writing about demonology, you can have the most fiery argument you can have, as long as you have a source for it and if you have a reason to make that argument. What I'm saying is the argument that is not acceptable is, I'm saying these things because a demon told me so. No. You cannot write a history of the church by saying, because Jesus showed up and told me as much.
I tell you what, plenty of bearded men did.
Yes, and some still do.
But I see exactly what you
mean. That's what I mean by methodological agnosticism. Yeah, if you have those experiences,
and you're absolutely right.
Which those experiences are real. I'm not this.
Well, that's history, isn't
dismissing them.
History can't be a demon told me. History has to be.
Yes.
Here's some facts.
Otherwise,
here's some other facts.
There's a method to history.
Here's some arguments.
Otherwise, you're a theologian.
Yeah.
And it's fine if you're a theologian.
It absolutely is.
As long as you say so.
Yes.
Don't pretend to be a historian.
No, I have no problem with any
as a theologian, those arguments are valid.
Yes.
So my perspective is methodological agnosticism.
Yes.
That this is something that should be cultivated.
It was the first thing I learned was critical analysis of historical documents. And that is to look at them objectively, not subjectively, but as best as you could. And not put into them what you want to see in them. And contextualize them. In what time were they written? By whom were they written? What part of the social strata was that author in? Etc., etc., etc. And that really helped me to start thinking like a historian should. Yeah. Perhaps in order to write a good paper.
Because don't forget, when you're writing a paper, there's a responsibility. I probably already said this. There's a responsibility to your readers. There's a responsibility to the document. You are as important as you need to be in order to bring that to light. Your opinion is not necessarily important. So there are methods that people have done to try to bring the best work that can be produced from there. But and again, these are now maybe personal issues, and this is my experience of not only being a historian but actually cultivating cultivating history as a practice.
Yes, history is a practice, isn't it? We won't go no tangents.
I find it at times ascetic. There's an asceticism, both physical and mentally. The experience of the archives isn't solely emotional.
I said that about you years ago.
It's a physical experience.
Yeah.
Because sitting 10 hours in an uncomfortable chair in an uncomfortable archive, looking at literally dusty old tomes that make your eyes burn.
Yeah, you're like those dudes that bricked himself up inside of mountains, right?
Yeah,
Exactly like
and
those
your
guys.
throat burns, and
Yep.
you struggle through it, and you just page after page. It's an ascetic
Yep.
practice, and then there's the asceticism of a mental asceticism that you constantly try to silence yourself with. Don't get too involved. Don't let your emotions get to you. You are entitled to them, but don't let them fuck up what you're doing, because keep remembering what you're doing is worth it, and it's worth the sacrifice. Just so there is this aspect to it.
Well, you're a better man than me, because I got well emotionally involved in some of these characters you were telling me about. Alonzo, my God. I love that guy. He was devious. I loved him.
I sent you an email once. When I was writing the thesis, I was doing we had shared information about this trial for years.
Yep.
Because it's such a fascinating case. It's like 70% of my thesis is that guy.
That guy. I love that guy.
And when I was doing the in-depth analysis in order to write that part of the thesis, and this is weird because this guy lived 400 years ago, and I realized that he died in hospital. I was heartbroken.
I was too. It was terrible.
Such an inglorious
I
end.
wanted him to get away with it. Oh,
Me too. Even if he was tried, and if he went to the Alto da Fé, that he would have adventures after that.
So more books.
The last record we have is him.
It was terrible.
He's sent to hospital and never heard from again. He never walked out.
No.
My heart was broken.
Yeah, it was tragic. It was tragic. It really was. I mean, some of these guys, that one really hit me hard, though. I love that guy. That's social history, though. You can get really involved in these people's lives,
yeah.
you know.
And let me just put this asterisk there. I won't go as far as to say that Alonso was a nice guy.
He was not a nice guy at all.
He was kind of a murderer.
Terrible.
To his credit,
It was terrible.
as far as I know, and this is saying something when we're dealing with these types of assholes. Trigger warning.
Yeah.
He wasn't a rapist, at least.
No, he wasn't. No, he didn't do that.
There were others who
Everything
were.
else but that. The thing is, a lot of the stories. I mean, reading your thesis was like visiting old friends. But as you were going through it, and you were sharing all these stories with me, and this is going to sound absolutely wrong, and I don't mean it wrong, and I'm not talking about all the bad guys, although we do have some bad actors. It reminded me of the sort of trade in occult material that we find today. It reminded me of the occult scene, of a culture. We have the same thing. We have people copying magic books. We have people making them up. We have people using them for really bad ends. We have people using them for really good ends. We have infuriating arguments about what's the real book and what's the not real book. We have arguments about which binding is better. And nothing has changed. That is what's done. Nothing has changed whatsoever since the 1600s, and I love that.
Yeah, magic and assholes aren't a new mix.
I did not say that. There are
plenty of good people.
99% good people. Quote me on that. 99%.
And I'll say something. This is like
Dearie me.
most readers won't know this, although they can read the thesis. It's available. It's in
They
English.
can indeed.
I will say, Antonio Alves, the priest, was a genuinely good man. He was a priest. He probably broke every vowel. But at the end of the day, he was a good man. I believe this.
I think there were a lot of good people just getting duped by some of these guys.
Yeah.
Some of these people were real characters, weren't they? And some of them, I feel, were genuine. I mean, we'll never know. We only know what the Inquisition tells us about them.
Antonio Cáceres seems to be a genuine believer in magic. I describe him a believer to the point of naivety.
I like the ones that were Marina. Is that her name? They were digging so deep for treasure, but beside her house that they almost wrecked the foundation of her house.
Yeah,
I'm like, that is me. I would do that. Yeah. This is the good bit of history. I mean, you get these stories, and you just think, God, people haven't changed at all.
So it's weird to do this tangent now, so maybe we can do it later if we still want to.
That's fine.
Because there's a whole. We're talking about very specific characters, and people need to realize.
People need to read the thing to know who these people are. I know it's terrible.
Is a micro historical exercise towards macro history. So academic
but also,
jargon.
this is a friendly chat between friends. And I've been with you since the inception of the thesis. I've seen all these characters, so
yes, and I
this is stuff we know. It's not like privileged information. You can read the thesis. You can learn all about all these guys. We've just been drinking, and this is where it's going.
And I sent you a bunch of emails while I was at the archive.
Yeah,
I could find the first few days, but then it really when it started getting dark.
I didn't mind.
I would need to email somebody to virtually cry, I guess.
I got the sense that it was desperately hard. And in fact, one of those times I was actually, did I write this paper or did I think I was going to write this paper? I was studying, I probably wrote this paper. God, academia just takes it out of you, right? You don't even know what day it is. On the digitization of manuscripts and the difference between reading them online and reading them in the archives.
Oh, sure.
And I thought of you throughout the whole thing because I know you had the experience that I would not have for a very long time, if ever. Because I have to I've not even done a master's degree. I'm at the very, very beginning of my academic career, and I have a business to run and don't know how far I'll get.
Yeah.
So I might never have that experience, but you've I've seen, that's twice now. You let me in Coimbra. I got to see
the book there.
Yeah, one of the manuscripts. And today I saw two, just glimpses. But that means everything. And it is a completely different experience.
And by the way, lightning news. I came here, I told you, I came here to look at those two magic books again. I found the third one today. Tiny thing.
Is this the medical one?
Yes, the medical one. It has a couple magical procedures, and it has it doesn't have the drawing, it has the description of a magic circle.
Okay.
And the character Liabana was apparently using it to fool some people into giving him money to find treasure.
Why is there always treasure involved? I'm not lying.
They were here in Cuenca.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go on a treasure hunting mission across Portugal.
Felix, when I was Sunday, he sent me a few paper articles online and a whole paper on treasures in the region of Cuenca.
Let's go. What are we doing here?
Liabana was convincing these guys that there was treasure in a cave nearby, and this is like limestone. There are caves everywhere, so they were looking for Moorish treasure over here.
There's Moors here.
Yeah.
Shit, I know what I'm doing tomorrow.
I was going somewhere with something. Wait. Yes, I was talking about methodological agnosticism.
Yeah.
Now, here's the important thing, and again, personal stuff. But I don't mind sharing, because we're friends and nobody's listening.
Nobody's listening by this point.
There is a point, and I have experienced this several times, and it's stronger when you're investigating particular individuals, when you're going deep into somebody, trying to figure out his biography.
Right.
And this is where the distinction between scholar and practitioner breaks down, which is that when you are going deep into something and you're looking at this documentation and you're into it, you're just, I'm not saying this in a bad way, you're drowning in it. You're just saturated by it, constantly looking at these documents and thinking about this individual and what did he do and trying to piece his life together. You start to have impressions that cannot be explained by scholarly intuition. You get things, you start to understand things that aren't written in any document anywhere. And I had the experience of, I was writing a paper, it's been published, about an alchemist called Anselmo Castelo Branco. I was looking for his birth date.
Yes, I remember.
And I was looking at he was a familiar of the Inquisition. He was a lay cooperator of the Inquisition. And every time you joined the Inquisition, they did this whole thing about you. They examined your whole life story because they needed to know if you were Jewish or not.
Right, of course, yes.
And usually, one of the most important the type of documentation they collect for that is that they find they will have copies of the baptism records. Because they want to know if you're a Christian, when you were baptized, who baptized you, who were your godfather and your godparents, and they want to know all that thing. Yep. And I was looking at this guy's, it's called the Diligência de Habilitações, Habilitation Diligence. I was looking through this because the date of birth should be there. And it was a huge one. It was one of the longest I've seen. And I was looking through it, and I've been working on this guy for quite a while, and all of a sudden I just had the concrete knowledge. This information is not here. This information needs to be sought in the baptism records of his hometown. Just happened that his hometown is in the district of Coimbra. The university had them. And in 10 minutes, I was looking at his baptism record. So you get impressions and inklings and things that you can't put your finger on. And the important thing is that this is recurrent among historians. Now, we will never speak of this in public. But this is... Everybody that does in-depth work into anything knows that there are things that you will put on your book that you have no proof of. Yeah. You simply know it. Something tells you that this is real.
Have you also had where you kind of the opposite? You haven't found it, but you absolutely know it exists somewhere.
Yeah, although...
Is that a different thing?
I can see how that would be similar, but I haven't had that one. I had this personal information about individuals.
All right.
And this, which to me makes, in my personal life, history is my practice. And I perceive history as a form of necromancy. And I'm not the only one who says this. I think like Al Cummings also...
No, it's absolutely... Yeah, it's absolutely true.
It's a process which you have to work at. It's a process by which you...
communicate with the dead.
And it's because there is I don't want this to sound wrong, but there's a commerce happening. Mm-hmm. Because you are giving voice to the dead. That's that Absolutely. Exercise of drawing away and allowing the document to speak. And sometimes it's not the document that speaks.
Yep.
It's the person in the document that speaks, and you become his voice. And this is your job now.
100% there with you, yes.
And I have that.
I have not achieved it, but I know that is the goal.
And I've had this a few times. And it's one of the and when I was like going all the time to Lisbon to look at the Inquisition trials and studying in Coimbra and being here and in Amsterdam, also an old city, not as old as these, but, well, old in its own way. And there are times when, again, particularly when you're doing this type of academic work, you're saturating yourself with this information, and you're reading the names of the streets how they used to be named, because streets change name all the time with political regimes, and you read the names of the streets and the people who lived there and what they would do, the businesses that existed there, and you're walking down the street with this information in your head, and it's like sometimes you see. And I'm not, what I'm about to say, I cannot tell you if it's real or if it's solely a mental impression, but you see a glimmer. And you see it. You see that city 500 years ago. For a moment, a single moment, and you see it and you understand something.
Yes.
And that is one of the not only are the archives here objectively important for the understanding of magic in the Iberian Peninsula, because they have magic books here,
Yes.
which are rare, but there is this. I will joyfully jump at the opportunity to go to any old city and walk alone in the streets after having read documentation about it. Liabana was from here. He was dealing with people from here. They were hunting treasures here.
And these streets up here haven't changed all that much,
no,
have they?
And
where we are sitting
there's
now.
There's that feeling you get, and there's the thousands and millions of people walk these cobblestones, and they touch this wall, and you can touch that wall, and that moment. There are, again, maybe this is a philosophical argument.
You hate philosophy.
Yeah, I hate philosophy. You can say that
maybe it's a metaphysical argument.
all time exists simultaneously. We simply move toward.
That's your physics speaking.
Yes, we move through it, and we don't know how to stop.
Yes.
That's the tragedy. Tragedy, but I also consider it a blessing, because it's a good thing that we die.
Take it back. I'm not ready. I'm not here for it. No.
But when you walk through these places and you are communing with everybody that's
who
here.
has ever walked here before? Yeah.
Yeah, and there is this. I'm not talking in metaphysical.
No.
term. I'm talking about there is this shared human experience.
There is.
That you can share with these people that are not here anymore, but you get to experience the same things. And the wind here is cold, and you walk down and you know that thousands of people have felt this cold and this wind, and this is the same wind as they felt, and there is this
this is
collectiveness.
Why I react the way I do. I'm not Catholic, but when I go into one of these massive, extremely Catholic cathedrals or churches like the one in Coimbra and the one here, I have a reaction that is not solely of me, because it is the pressure of all the people who have come into that building for a specific purpose.
With dreams and heartbreak.
Yes,
and their real lives on their skins.
And they have looked at that same Mary I'm looking at, and they have prayed and prayed and prayed. And I shit you not, I'm not. I used to be, but I'm no longer really one for mystical experiences. I've become maybe jaded. But I stood whilst you were doing your thing. I went to do my thing. I stood in front of this particular statue of Mary and the baby Jesus. And I stared at her. And she did not stare at me. She had one eye that was fashioned in such a way as if you hid her other eye, it was looking at you. But otherwise it was not. And the other eye was definitely looking out, beyond you at the great divine or whatever she was looking at. But the way the shadows moved in that church, if you stared at her long enough, that one eye that was looking out appeared to start to shed a tear of blood from its inner corner. I shit you not. I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Shit.
But it was just a shadow. It was possibly, the artist was that good. I don't know. But, I stared long enough to make sure that it wasn't actually happening, because the last thing I need in my life is a certifiable miracle in a Catholic church, right? But I just thought of all the people, the pressure of all the people who have come in here, those who might have seen that particular statue. I mean, there were enough statues to fill 5 churches.
Protestant churches.
Well, yeah, we've got no statues. Bit lacking in that area. But yeah, it is that, and it's hundreds and hundreds of years here, isn't it? Hundreds and hundreds of years here.
The cathedral is 900 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, it's astounding.
So this is just my criticism of people who, and then obviously, I'm sorry,
don't be sorry.
I'm all warmed up with the Risoli.
We're not even done. We have a whole other bottle here as well. It can't go to waste.
These are my gripes.
Cannot take it home.
These are my gripes with that patronizing statement that practitioners, because practitioners like to put themselves at the center of the universe, it's part of it, particularly in the occultism, and that scholars can never truly understand the truth of these mysteries of the soul and the magic and this. Fuck you! You can't understand what I'm talking about. You don't know what I experience.
Look, one of the things I hate most is the division between scholars and practitioners.
No.
I would love to see this crumble a bit. I would love to see each respect the other just a tiny bit.
And look,
nobody's perfect, but just a tiny bit of respect,
recently,
one for the other. It is changing.
Bernd Christian Otto, scholar, he has started a new journal that incentivizes the collaboration between practitioners and scholars. And the first article came out, and it's on the Cultus Sabbati. It's a scholar and a
we shall post a link. That's absolutely right.
Downright practitioner, 100%, and it's tremendous piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
So that can work perfectly, but there is the issue, which is my struggle and why I sometimes feel like slapping people that don't talk to me like I'm not a practitioner. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. Like I don't experience things by being a scholar. How can I? Because here's where the divide fucks up. Because if I don't use proper academic methodologies, which practitioners seem to claim are negative for the full understanding of magic, if I don't use proper academic methodologies, my spirits get angry. So what the fuck am I supposed to do? How does that fit the scheme?
The thing is, there are plenty of practitioners out there who will never talk about what they do. So you'd never know they were. Like, I rarely talk about what I do. And I'm not going to start now.
Well, and this
you know what I mean?
This is the first time I'm talking about this.
Yeah. So, before we judge, just have a thought about what you don't know about a person. Is all I'm saying. Because I've been practicing some form of magic since 1977, and I'll never talk about it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And I know you have a practice, and you will never talk about it, and that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Fuck right off.
No, and
let's hope nobody heard that
this
one.
is the figure, and one of the reasons why at this point I'm not. I can't go back to physics. Is that this is, like I said, this is at this point it's not my job. This is itself a practice. It fits into other things which I won't speak of.
No need.
But this is a form of I don't like to use the word magic in particular. To me, it's all religion. This is part of my.
I think that's because you're a Catholic.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Sure. Yeah, you do
maybe.
make a very harsh.
But then I wouldn't always use the word magic. It's I don't know what word I'd use, but I think neither of them.
So my scholarly work, call it dry. That's part of my practice. Is my point.
Okay,
I think
fine. That's a good point. Yes.
I think I made the point like four times.
Well, nobody's listening by now anyway, so it doesn't matter what we say. Matt will be like, what the fuck are you guys doing here?
Is there anything? Are we done?
We could be done. So we're going to wrap it up.
What time is it?
I have no idea.
Oh, 8. 8? Shit. Okay. We were...
So we've been talking for almost 2 hours now. I'm sure we'll turn it off and talk for 2 more because we have a lot of food and still some booze to get through.
Yeah, and we have the local specialties that we bought in a can.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, one of them can be eaten cold. The other one needs to be warmed up in a microwave.
That's fine.
Which is fine.
Certainly not in a tin.
No.
No.
Right? So anyway, for those interested, my thesis was defended the last 31st of October. People said it was a good omen because Halloween, although I don't deal in those paganisms.
is a great omen.
To me, I celebrate All Saints, and I don't care about the rest. I'm rude to children who knock on my door. Because when I was a kid, we had something like that. We call Pão por Deus, which you woke up on the 1st of November, like a proper Catholic, early. And you would knock on people's doors and they would give you sweet bread. That was me growing up. And I just thought, these bums don't want to wake up early. It was a holiday and I woke up early, suffering for not sleeping in. And I went to ask for sweet bread. It wasn't even chocolate. It was like bread with like honey and nuts in it. Which these days I love.
Well, I won't lie. I was the asshole who on Halloween went egging around the houses of the rich. I think I toilet papered a few trees as well.
No, but fuck the rich.
But I did get candy. Pillowcases full of candy. Yes. One of the benefits of being an American. Right? I guess we'll sign off and carry on.
I guess so.
Right, well, it was lovely to talk to you.
You too.
And
I ramble on.
let's hope we can do this again sometime in some other medieval city. Where's next? Come on. We need a good one.
Look, I'm right now working on the Bento Falcon de Frota book. So the book I found at the archives, I'm working on it right now. And I'm going deep into this guy. So, it's going okay.
Okay, well, so maybe we'll come back to Cuenca someday.
Let me think. Where did he hang out? Did he go to Madrid? No. He hung around Lisbon and sometimes up north.
Lisbon would be cool. Lisbon would be cool.
He was
Toledo or Salamanca? Find a reason for us to go there.
Yes. I was in Salamanca last summer.
I know. I'm jealous.
It was beautiful. And I'm saying this as a Catholic. I have seen many churches in my lifetime. Salamanca had the most impressive churches I've ever seen.
I'll just be there in the church for the rest of my life.
And not even the interiors, just the outside. They had the church, and you're going to hate this. They had a church, I don't remember, shameful, I don't remember the order.
That's okay.
Anyway, but that monastery was the monastery that funded Christopher Columbus.
Oh shit, let's burn it down!
They got because it's an investment. They got a lot of money back, and it shows. It's probably the most beautiful front gate I have ever seen on Earth.
Oh, I have mixed feelings about this.
I would imagine you would, yes. But maybe Salamanca next time.
Maybe Salamanca, yeah, okay. All right, we're going to sign off now because it's time.
Yeah.
It is 2 hours since we started, and if anyone is still listening, we thank you. Would you like to thank them?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
That was Erzebet and José Leitão having a truly inspiring conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did and appreciate the effort that it takes for academic researchers to produce their wonders. I learned a great deal from listening to José in this conversation, and I thank him and all of the wonderful authors in our field for their continued hard work in bringing us the fruits of their labour. If you would like to read more from José, you can find his works in the description below. If you have made it this far into the show, then thank you. We are so grateful for your support, and anything that you can do to help us reach a wider audience will be greatly appreciated. So please leave a like, make a comment, and share our podcast and our work with all those who would enjoy it. I am pleased to continue exposing the thoughts and works of our global authorship to the widest audience possible, and thank you for anything that you can do to help. Keep your eye on this space because we have an absolute ton of new material coming out this year and much, much more to share. Not only from myself, but the entire Hadean Press team. I hope that you all enjoyed your new year, and I wish you great happiness in the year to come, and I will see you all again in the next one.